Is this Zoom?
Oh, my Lord.
That'll come up and they said Zoom should put here.
Oh, this is a little fancy here. Okay.
Oh, he's with us.
I am calling the July 30th special board meeting to order. Mr. Treasurer, will you please call the roll?
President Adair,
Present.
Ms. Beckerly,
Present.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Cole,
I'm here.
Dr. Pierce,
Present.
Mr. Ragland.
I think he's on mute.
I'm here.
We can't hear him, but I know he is here by Zoom. And Vice President Reyes.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam President.
Thank you. And Board Member Ragland, if you can hear us, we can see you. We logged your attendance and we'll figure out why we can't actually hear you. That might just be a new technical thing because this is new setup to us. All right, board members, let's look at our agenda this evening. We are here to have another great facilitated discussion with AJ Crable from the Council of Great City Schools to continue our goals and guardrails and speak about governance. And that is all we are doing this evening, and we will continue that tomorrow as well. Is there a motion to approve our agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I believe I heard Ms. Beckerly and
I think it was.
I didn't
Mr.
say
Brown.
He's over there.
You didn't say anything?
Dr.
Oh, I'm
Pierce
sorry.
and
I
Cole.
said
This
something.
board member
Tina
Brown.
said something.
Okay, I've got it. President Adair,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Thank you. And Vice President Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to AJ Crable from the Council of Great City Schools. Hi, AJ.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to get to be in the same room with you all after so many months virtual. It's nice to meet you all in person. When's the last time this group was in the same place at the same time?
Right after, before we closed everything down, right? Back in March?
Well over a year.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
a long time. March.
Wow, and it's been quite a while. And so, as a way of coming back together into the space, what I want to do is open it up in the circle, just share. Often what we think about when we think about the past 18 months is how much it's taken away. It's taken so much away from our children in terms of time in instruction. It's taken away so much in terms of time in together and connection, and obviously it's taken loved ones. That's often the context in which we focus when talking about this. But on this occasion of coming together again as a team, as a governing team, I want to actually go in the other direction and look at what are blessings that have been experienced since the last time this group was all together in the same room. And so as your way of checking in for the evening, we'll go around the room. Everybody, you're in the circle, then you're in the conversation. What is one blessing that you've experienced, something that you're really grateful for, that you've experienced over the last 18 months? Who will be the first to share? What's a blessing, something that you're truly grateful for? Yeah.
I would say for my team, and I say team with that true meaning, what the blessing was while we were a team before, we're really a team now. So enhanced teamwork through all of this has been a real blessing to get us through.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think for me, it's just been further incentive and push to pay attention to health and
Yeah.
to pay attention to medicine and science. I haven't focused on science for many years. I used to, and it's given me the opportunity to do that and to spend a lot more time with my wife.
Yeah, it's a real blessing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Who
Oh,
else?
I'm grateful on the school side to have been able to assist the official graduation ceremonies. That was a real honor and pleasure for me, as it is every year. I'd say on the personal side, much like Board Member Brown, being able to stay healthy, having a bout with something, don't know what it was, but having a bout with something that I was eventually able to overcome.
Yeah. Thank you, and welcome. Who else? What's a blessing you've experienced? Yeah, Carolyn?
Spending more time with family,
Yeah.
because during the virtual meetings, someone from the family would have to come to the house and stay with my mother. So it was a lot of family time together that I have learned to appreciate and learned to rely on others.
Yeah.
I think on the school side, I think it's been a blessing that we all stuck together in this. And I think even though, again, we come from different backgrounds and different kind of experiences, I think when it came down to our students being number one, we all really did that and it made that a priority. And then similar to everyone else, more on the personal side, family and staying healthy. And during this time, I was able to add a new member to our family and be in a position to do that, to help another child. So that's a blessing.
For school, we were able to, just thankful that we were able to make tough decisions for the state's largest school district. We were able to get school students back in school safely, graduate students safely, and have 8,100 students involved in a summer experience like never before. And it's because we work together, we continue to be focused, and we relied on our partners to help us navigate this terrain. On a personal note, that even through the loss of my father, my siblings and I were able to start a memorial scholarship fund in my parents' name, and we gave 5 $1,000 scholarships to 5 high school seniors last month on Father's Day. So to be able to do that and was a blessing in kind of commemorating that a year of the loss for him.
Yeah, go for it.
On the school side, I'm grateful that we now have a laptop in every kid's hand, huge. And I think that, we sort of have leapfrogged to whatever the next, 21st century learning is going to look like with technology and integrating it. I think that, moving a district our size is hard. And I think that the pandemic, the silver lining is it got us there, and I think there's a lot of people excited about the potential in that. Teachers, instructionally, and that's really good. On the personal side, and I think we almost missed how significant it was because we got it done and then we were on to the next crisis, and it's really significant. On the personal side, despite my advanced age, I'm a relative newlywed, and Bill and I ended up with my 2 sons and my stepdaughter with us for a good 8 or 9 months. And I never would have spent that time. My sons are in their 20s and out seeking their fortunes. They never would have been with me for that period of time anyway. And they got to really know my husband got to really know them. They got to be buddies with their stepsister, and I knew that we exceeded beyond any of our greatest hopes when they all ganged up on me. We'd arrived at that point. Be hard. Yeah.
James, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm blessed. Both of my kids came back home from school, safe and sound. Really, really big blessing for me. I'm grateful to all of you. I think it's huge that we were able to stick together and move this district through probably its most challenging time in our history. And I just commend all of you for that. And Jen and Ramona and your leadership, Dr. Dixon, your leadership, as well as Stan and Miss Carolyn. It's just been a Herculean effort, but grateful that we were able to make it through and see some light at the end. So very grateful for all.
I'll just keep it short, just grateful. That's all I can do for now.
So I'll keep mine short too, and there's no separation between professional and personal. I'm grateful that humanity as a whole is valuing our children, that every day new children and babies are born, that hope exists for our society and world as a whole. And it's a blessing that we as a board did take, 28, 29 days to stop and actively engage and participate in that, whether it was for our families, for our district, for ourselves. So I'm grateful and blessed for humanity.
Well, welcome for all the blessings that you've experienced over the last 18 months. Welcome back to the circle. So, we've got a lot to get done over these next 2 days. We are going to dive into what it looks like to begin implementing the work of the board based on having priorities sorted out. The first step in the journey is always being clear about what the priorities are. You've taken that step and you are really nearing a point of completion with that, which we'll talk about later, such that you can now actually start using the priorities to completely redefine your work. And that is all that we're going to spend our time on over the next 2 days. We're going to talk about what it looks like to completely redesign your agendas, to be intensely focused on the priorities that you've put together. We're going to talk about what it looks like to redesign your calendars, redesign your committees, redesign your policies, redesign your procedures, everything top to bottom with an intention that you're just really, really, really focused in on the things that you all say matter most. That is the name of the game for these next 2 days. What we'll come away with at the end of these 2 days is a fair amount of information that helps us understand what specifically you all want the future work of this board to look like. I'll be taking extensive notes over these 2 days to then try to take the implementation timeline that was previously created and upgrade it with the new items and the new timeline based on where we are at the end of this weekend. And then from there, we'll use that as a guide to rapidly begin to move you away from your current set of norms and into the set of norms that you indicate over these next 2 days that you want to be in. That is the work over these 2 days. That is the deliverable, is a refined implementation timeline that then outlines on by which exact dates the specific things that we talk about over these 2 days will happen in reality. And then we'll wrap it up and call it quits at later tomorrow evening. That's the intention for our 2 days. What questions do you have about our agenda for these 2 days? What questions do you have? All right, then the place to begin is in here you have a document that shows your goals and guardrails. You all have probably seen this document before. It looks like this. You're going to want to go ahead and pull this out. It indicates the Board of Education goals and guardrails. And on the first page, it has your 3 goals, your 4 guardrails listed out. I want to start here and just ground us in this, to check in where folks are at with this, because I don't know that we've had a conversation about these in a while. So I want to start there and just check in with folks regarding the goals. Somebody read for us goal number 1.
Goal number 1, strengthen reading proficiency. The percentage of third grade students proficient in reading on the Ohio State Test, OST, will increase from 43%, or a decline in the benchmark due to COVID, in school year 2018 to 2019, to 55% by June of 2026.
Thank you. Anyone have questions about that first one? Anyone have questions about that first goal? Who
Can
re-
it be more ambitious?
Say what?
Can it be more ambitious?
Yeah, curiosity about ambitious. Oh, as you think about that, let's read through, after we've read through all 3 of them, one of the ways of thinking about that question, which is certainly an appropriate question for the board to contemplate, is what things, and everything has to exist in balance. And so if you're going to add someplace, the question becomes, what are you going to back away from? And so start thinking in terms of, I would like to see us be more aggressive here. What are things that we could back off of slightly to free up space, energy, and resources to really double down here? And so hold on to that question, and as we go through all of the goals and guardrails, then we'll come back to that and give us, and I'll be asking you to give us a sense of what would you want to strengthen up to, and what would you be willing to back away from in exchange for that? Other questions about goal number 1? Somebody read for us goal number 2.
Develop portrait-ready graduates. The percentage of the class of 2028 who earn the Portrait of a Graduate seal will increase from 0% in June 22 to 25% by June 28.
What questions do you have about this goal?
I don't really have a question because I think the timing is reasonable, but I'm wondering if, in my mind, these were 5-year goals and that's 2028. And I don't know if that's an issue or not, but I think that that's probably a reasonable time frame because we have a lot to do to build it out before we can even start to graduate kids with the seals. So I'm not worried about the timing per se. I'm just wondering if we're running afoul of any sort of official, important concept by having a.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Questions about goal number 2?
Just for us to consider, kind of going back to your comments earlier, for us to, as a consideration, think about what are the barriers to, more ambitious percentages.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, who will read goal number 3?
Goal number 3, close opportunity gaps. The percentage of 4-year graduation cohort students who complete state and district graduation requirements will increase from 81.4% in August 2020 or decline in the benchmark due to COVID to 86% in August 2026.
What questions do you have about this goal? Any questions about goal number 3? All right, who will read the first guardrail?
Fund intervention supports. The superintendent will not allow the multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, or students' needs to be underfunded.
What questions do you have about this one?
I don't have a question so much as a recognition that the devil will be in the details on this one.
Certainly.
Mr. Ragland.
Yeah, James?
I think my comment kind of goes to Carol's concern as well. We should be the ones to determine whether or not it's underfunded. And so I think the board is going to have to do a bit more homework on determining what funding looks like, and we're going to have to, reach out to all of our partners to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what that means. We should not be being told by one particular entity or another that it's underfunded. We've got to know that ourselves and know it very well.
Yeah, so the next step in the process, and one of the things that we'll be spending a lot of time on tomorrow is around monitoring. So the board doesn't just set priorities and then walk away and hope that things work out. The board sets priorities and then redesigns its monthly agendas, try to invest half of your time in monitoring progress. And so one of the things that happens next is the superintendent says, here's how we will monitor, here's how we will provide evidence that these are in fact not underfunded. And so as we get into that monitoring, as you look at those interim guardrails, if your sense is that those don't in fact help provide adequate evidence as to whether or not your MTSS is underfunded, then it's time to have a conversation with your superintendent, say, did we pick the right things to pay attention to? But you shouldn't have to go out as a board. Y'all shouldn't have to go out and track down information. Information about your priorities will be flowing to you, and that's how it should be. You shouldn't have to run around town to figure out what's happening with your own organization. Your organization should be providing updates and data to you on a regular basis, specifically in accordance with the calendar that you all adopt. Yeah.
The only observation I have on this one is that if this document is not only for our use, but also for the community, then we need someplace to define multi-tiered systems of supports. More than any other phrase or words on this page, that stands out to me as something that requires that.
Yeah.
Is that not in our glossary for our policies?
Well, and we also have a whole booklet about it.
That blue
Yeah.
booklet.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
got
but-
it clearly.
But even if it's just a reference where somebody can,
Oh, yeah, no, I agree,
Yes,
but I
yeah.
think that
They know
that's
where to go
more
to
of,
find
it.
it's more of a reference because we have a pretty refined concept of it.
Yeah, James?
Oh, can't hear you.
Okay.
I think he just might have been nodding in agreement, maybe.
Who will read the next guardrail?
I will. Align resources equitably. The superintendent will not allow any region to be without strong learning communities.
What questions do you have about this guardrail? All right. Who'll read the next guardrail? James, you gonna read the next one for us?
Prioritize a whole child focus. Superintendent will not allow the district to ignore a whole child approach.
What questions do you have about this one? And who will read the last guardrail for us?
ensure a culturally responsive staff. The superintendent will not allow the staff to be culturally non-responsive.
What questions do you have about this guardrail?
Considering a matter of our state biennial budget, and what do we, let me flesh it out a little bit, but, I'm thinking of, what the state just outlawed, but how we're gonna move around that. How are we actually going to be culturally responsive in a way that not only adheres necessarily to law, but at the same time really meets the needs of our students and staff. Understanding that, 56% of our students are African American. Another contingency of our students not only are African American, but a different type of African American, and more importantly also that we have other enclaves within the district with their own, global history that they have every entitlement to learn about. Critical race theory aside, to me that's a theory that was created by someone, and rightfully so in intent, but it doesn't encompass every truth that there is to be taught in the history and communication of in relationship cultures of people. It's not the defining theory that tells everybody's truth. So how do we putting critical race theory aside to honestly tell folks who they are, where they come from, and how it's germane to the history and productivity of this country, their contribution.
So I agree with what Michael said, but the idea around cultural responsiveness is really more of a philosophy that embraces how we kind of use culture as a superpower, the recognition that every student is coming in not as a blank slate, but as a culture, and how do our teachers, who also come in with a culture, really understand who they are, understand their students, and then understand how that's actually a benefit to the learning experience. So it's not so much of a curriculum kind of conversation, which it could lead to, but it's more of a philosophy around how do our staff and students and families interact around the idea of culture, which can be actually more expansive than just race and ethnicity.
Got it. Yeah.
Were you going to reply to that?
No, go for it.
I think my question relates to all 4 of the guardrails. As I think about the work that our district needs to do, that our community needs to do, and the importance of language, I'm concerned that every guardrail starts with the superintendent. In the 21st century, we need to be embracing of a collaborative leadership model. And I think by introducing the guardrails in the preceding paragraph, by saying the superintendent may not use or will allow in pursuit of, sets a tone and sets a frame. I would like to see guardrails that indicate that we, being inclusive of the superintendent, the treasurer, the internal auditor, our staff, our educators, our bus drivers, our custodians, our board members, our community, our parents, are also included in these guardrails. The goals are framed in such a way that we're looking at a district or we're looking at an entire population of students. But when we come to these guardrails, we've tunnel focused it so much around one person. So I think that was more of a statement than a question, but something to give thought to.
James, you want to jump in?
I would entertain that thought if Dr. Pierce would be willing to share language around some changes. I think that may be a good exercise for us to engage in, because I do believe that it would be inclusive. Understanding that Dr. Dixon has been with us the entire time and that she owns these guardrails and has from their inception. I have a tendency to agree with Dr. Pierce here, and I would hear maybe if she had new language that we could consider as a board that articulates what it is that she's trying to say. I don't have it, but I do want to say that I agree with her statement.
And I would suggest, I guess, looking at this a little bit differently. These guardrails, as I read them, all pertain to administrative matters. And for us to put that, I think appropriately, on administration is really to say the superintendent and her team. Adding that may help, I don't know. But I think that ultimately, with Elisa being at the top of the administrative team, these things are her responsibility. People in the community, board members, don't necessarily know if we are or not focused on whole child approach, or focused on, we're not going to know without being informed by our administrative staff, by our superintendent, whether our student needs are underfunded. And I think that this places the burden on them, on Dr. Dixon, to tell us that that's the case, so that we can respond to that and act appropriately to make sure that we give her and her team what they need to be able to accomplish this.
I respectfully appreciate your input, Board Member Brown, but I beg to differ. I think parents who have students that are dyslexic and see their students not getting those services, let us know that those are underfunded. I think parents that community members that walk into a school and see that children aren't being challenged or students aren't being engaged, know that there's not a priority on the whole child. So I beg to differ that only an administrator or administration can inform us as board members that these guardrails are out of whack. When I walk into a school such as Brookhaven the other day, and I looked at the condition of that building, and I thought to myself, oh man, our staff, our team is going to really have to pull this building together by the first day of school. And my heart was just like, they are going to be working tooth and nail to get this stuff ready for our babies. I can recognize that as a board member. I don't need Dr. Dixon to come tell me, hey, I need you to notice this.
Any other questions about the goals of the guardrails before we proceed?
James?
Oh, yeah, James?
Sure. I think I'm looking at it from a bigger perspective than what Board Member Brown, I think, believes, and I may have done a bad job of articulating it. I think the way that you've explained your interpretation of the guardrails is probably the way that we've done business for quite some time as a district. And I think with some of the things that we've learned over the last year or two, is that in order for us to really kind of achieve the goals, the community is going to have to be a bit more focused on the guardrails and what they may have been in the past. And so, prior to this day, and it may have been okay that, the superintendent would own this and disseminate the information for us. But I think one of the things that's going to be a blessing coming out of COVID is that more people will be intimately involved in some of the operations, pertaining to the district on every level. And I think it started with us going out to them and gathering the information that we needed in order to come up with this document. What we saw in that engagement process was a community that was not just willing to give us feedback, but prepared to give us feedback. And I think if we're talking about doing things differently, our level of inclusion for that community has got to be greater. And I just think that it hit me really well when Dr. Pierce mentioned that along these lines, and that's kind of what I was thinking. Sorry it took so long to explain.
No problem at all. Yeah, other questions?
I just have one thought about, I think Dr. Pearson, James, is absolutely right that it should be a we thing in terms of this is our community values. I think this document, though, as I think of it anyway, is our management tool for Dr. Dixon. So I think that it's a both and that I think maybe this language should be the way it stays in terms of our management tool. But I think being really intentional about getting the message out to the community that these are our values and we've gone through this process and we want all of you to embrace it is a really good idea in terms of a campaign going forward and, maybe really being really intentional about that. And maybe even, we can get these community listening sessions kind of up and running as a regular thing. Part of the way we do that is we check in with the community and say, how are we doing? How are we doing? Oh, I didn't want to be up there.
James turned his camera off. James turned his camera off.
I don't want to see myself. But anyway, that's my thought about, it's a both and, really.
I agree with what Carol just said, but I also think that because our district is a little bit different in our management structure, and I know some of these goals and guardrails do apply to things that Stan will need to do and Carolyn will need to do. And, they are obviously evaluated separately from Dr. Dixon. They're equal in this organization as leadership. So I don't know if it makes sense to add them as well to ones that make sense. Not all of them, but ones that make sense. That they would have, it would be tied to their evaluations.
And in that respect, I would be very open to using the administration or administrative leaders. Understanding again that Dr. Dixon is the champion of this, this is how she's being evaluated, but this looks like a very outwardly facing, well thought out document that will go beyond just the hands of board members. So I would like to propose that language is more inclusive of our team at least.
Before we transition away from this conversation, Michael had made a statement about wanting to see about adjustments, and my invitation was, tell us what you want to spend more time on, tell us what you want to spend less time on. Michael, back to you.
I'm sorry, I was entering a date.
What would you like to spend less time on in exchange for spending more focus in other places? So, looking just at this document, nothing else. This is the only thing we're talking about here. What are the things on here that you'd like to spend less focus on in exchange for investing greater focus in other places?
Based on this sheet here, I mean, I want to make sure that we're very focused on certainly all three of our goals. I think, to me, the multi-tiered system piece is really just setting the guardrail in motion that establishes our commitment to funding it. That's how I internalize this. That's how I interpret it. That we will maintain within our time frame our fidelity to MTSS. That we will not defund it. We will continue to invest in it. Is that a correct assertion?
Yes, and yes, and it also stemmed from ensuring that some programs that we had in place that we make sure that the entire district received those trainings. That's when we investigated. We found that the district stated that we were funding some programs and we were not. Mm-hmm. And so you said to me, that the board expects that these programs, like restorative practices, for example, was the one, that we want those programs to help all staff members be trained.
Absolutely.
And that we find the funding to make sure that happens.
Okay.
So that's great example for that.
So that I understand this clearly, I mean, as long as we're saying that we're gonna maintain our fidelity and strength of resources to investing in this model, to me, the areas that need the greatest discussion are gonna be the prioritization of our whole child. What does that look like? Alignment of our resources to create real equity within the district. What are gonna be our pathways to that? And then the final one would be to ensure culturally responsive staff. What are we gonna do? What are those methods of embedding that? And that might be a little more tactical in nature. But to me, 5,000 feet, what does this look like? And, you know, how do we even start from ourselves down? For example, restorative practices. We went through that training. We went to the schools in Pittsburgh and saw that. How do we lead by example, by learning ourselves? So to me, these three, prioritizing whole child, align resource equitably, and cultural responsive staff and students, board, to me, these would be the things that I think we should focus a greater portion of our time on these 2 days.
Go back just a moment, because I really liked and was thinking about what Carol said and also what Tina has said about the community, because I think they do have a vital role. And while we can't, and I like the separation you made of, you know, what we can expect and insist on from our staff, from our superintendent, we can't expect or require that of the public, of parents, but we can consciously go out and educate them and tell them, here's what we need you to tell us. Here's what we want you to, you know, keep us informed about. These are our priorities, and, you know, especially in these areas, don't hesitate to tell us about other things. But, you know, and really use this as a tool for continuing dialogue.
Any other reflections before we transition?
So
Go ahead.
you can go.
Oh, well, just going out on a limb here. I read and reread the preceding paragraph to guardrails. And it's pretty specific. You know, these are operational actions, typically strategic, not tactical, which the superintendent may or may not use or allow in the pursuit of the district goals. I would assume those are the three above on the top of the page. The guardrails are based on community's values, aligned with district educational visions and goals, and are non-negotiable. I took from this that all the work you've done was determining community values, that you determined these goals that are aligned with those values, and you've determined that they're non-negotiable in your eyes. And so I think it's important that sometimes when you're leading and executing, that when you make everyone responsible, then no one is responsible. And it's critical, I believe, and I can't speak for Carolyn, but for me, to know in each one of these, it's the superintendent. You've made it crystal clear that it's the superintendent will not allow this to happen. Now, how does she do that? Well, that's up to her to figure out and to incorporate in how she executes that to meet the needs that you have for inclusion of parents and community and support groups, and the two of us. But from the onset, I think you make it crystal clear in this statement to your staff, to your administration, to the community, that you are empowering and directing the superintendent to make sure that these things, in this particular, the way they're written, don't happen. You're not allowed to have this happen. And that's my take on it. So I read that preamble, if you will, and that's what I took from it. And know that you're empowering her, and she's the one that we have to work with. You can't negotiate these, but you have to figure out how you're going to execute these in support of living within the guardrails, but in support of achieving those 3 goals. So, not that I get a vote, I like the way it's written, because it doesn't say the treasurer.
I wish I could laugh, but I don't think that gets you or our internal auditor off the hook for the importance of what you contribute to the achievement of these guardrails. And so, no, I don't like the way that it's written. It needs to be a collaborative joint effort, and it needs to acknowledge that not just our superintendent can do this alone. But I don't want to continue to beat a dead horse. In regards to Michael's, Board Member Cole's comment around what we should focus more on, I agree that if there was a guardrail to focus more on, it would be the prioritization of the whole child focus. The other 3 guardrails coincide and lead into that and are intertwined with that. So if our number 1 guardrail and focus is a whole child focus, we're going to make sure that we're funding intervention supports, that we're aligning resources equitably, and that we're ensuring a culturally responsive staff.
Any other reflections before we transition?
I just have one, because I think it's important. I like how Stan used the word empower, because there's a flip side to this, and we really are empowering the superintendent to go out and do these things. You know, the flip side is we're expecting them, but there's also that element of, you know, she can wave this document around and say, wait a minute. And I just think that's an important aspect to understand.
And what we've done to add to this is those, the strategic plan that we have and the 4 priorities that we're rolling out bode well with the guardrails. So you would see more information, and I can bring something tomorrow that talks about the district priorities, and of those 4 is whole child focus, strong learning communities in every region, providing equitable equitable opportunities for all, and authentic engagement. So those are the 4 priorities that we're focused on, so that there is clear alignment with the board goals and guardrails.
If you
To
could
your
bring that,
point.
that would be great. I'd love
Yeah.
to see that.
And so we were making sure that we were purposeful, because heard from the community, and we want to make sure everybody is focused on those 4 things in order to get these things done.
Yeah, and so fortunately, I've been taking a lot of notes. It won't be tomorrow, because we just won't have time.
Yes, from where-
But I'll certainly work with your administration and come back with some slight tweaks. There are a few things that I think just the wording could be tightened up, things like that. But I've taken notes on everything you all have been describing, and so just know that I'll work with your administration to try to execute on those notes and bring this document back to you. So thank you for checking in by going through that and affirming, you know, that these are your priorities, that these are the things that you want your staff, all of your staff, focused in on. What we transition to is, are you actually going to honor that or not? And the way that you honor that, the first way that you honor that, is through how you choose to invest your time. In the document, June 15th agenda is provided to you. It is in the document. Also in the document, in your list of documents, is one called Completing a Board Agenda Evaluation. You will need these 2 documents for this next conversation. There's June 15th regular board business meeting, and there's Completing a Board Agenda Evaluation. You will need these 2 documents. So, what I'm going to ask each of you to do, I'm asking all of you to do, James, you're not off the hook, asking you to do this too. You'll just have to figure out how to do it there. Staff, I'm asking you to do this as well. And so everybody, if you're in the circle tonight and tomorrow, you are in the circle for every single activity. And so what I'm asking you to do is start with item number 1 on the agenda. And the first thing I want you to do is I want you to guesstimate how much time do we spend on item number 1 and round to the nearest minute, with no item receiving less than 1 minute, unless you just skipped the item entirely, and then it would be 0. But round to the nearest minute. So for each item, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, item 6, go through and estimate how many minutes do you think you spent on each of these items. Obviously, the intention of this is not to be perfect, so don't worry about that. But there are 26 items on here, 1 through 26. The first thing I want you to do is just do a quick guesstimate in minutes, with 0 meaning we literally spent no time on it, which is true for some things on here. 1 minute meaning we spent anywhere from 10 seconds to 60 seconds, and then the number of minutes beyond that. But in whole minutes, estimate how much time you spend on each of these items.
That we actually spent during this actual
During the
meeting.
June 15th actual meeting.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh dear.
Don't spend a ton of time on this. The point is not to have precision. If I wanted that, I would have already done it for you.
I don't,
There's a method to the madness, and precision is not a part of it. Estimate for June 15th, how much time do you feel like you spent on each of these items? I'll give you about 60 more seconds to go through.
What? No.
Intention is not precision, just quick guesstimate. How much time do I feel like we spent on this? Out of curiosity, that meeting started at 5:30. Anybody know when it ended? Probably about 11:30. If you subtract
Yeah,
out
executive session.
closed, is that including closed meeting?
Executive session.
Is that including executive
I
session?
think she's right if she includes executive, yeah.
All right, so if you subtract executive session, just the public parts of this meeting, how long?
2 hours.
About 2 hours?
That's my guess. I'm trying to think.
Okay.
you didn't have to.
Oh, there you go. Now you've heard one guess. Yours may be the same or different, but just gives you a ballpark. Go ahead and put down how much time you feel like you spend on each item on June 15th. Again, don't spend a lot of time on it. The goal isn't precise. You have less than a minute left.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Wasn't it?
I think so. I don't know. I don't remember.
Your partner can't help you, so don't bother.
Yes,
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Oh, you will when you think about it. It was the very last one.
Yeah, it was when the, Hopes was here.
Yeah,
Was that the one?
That's when Milton was here.
and the community engagement was the CCC code of conduct. Remember?
I think that last thing we did was the books. That was, you were out.
Are you sure? Because
Oh, that was the closing.
no,
Not the closing of the books.
that was close to the book. Because we moved the public comment.
All right,
on that one.
you got estimated minute counts plugged in? Okay, so now that you've got your estimated minute counts plugged in, what we're going to do is utilize the procedure in this how to conduct a board agenda evaluation, which is on basically the third page of the thing. It's called Section 2, How to Conduct a Board Agenda Evaluation. This is what we're going to be doing, so if you're curious about it, about any instructions I offer, just read that, because that's what we're doing. So now that you've got an estimate of the time, what we're going to do is we're going to have you then go through, and for each of these, next to the time, you will put a Y, an N, or a question mark, a yes, a no, or a question mark. And the thing that you're going to be evaluating, is this item focused on your goals for student outcomes? Now, I want to be clear about what I mean by that. And so I will read from the instructions. As clarity, the only way to answer yes to this question
is if the entire purpose of the agenda item is to monitor progress relative to the board's adopted goals using a monitoring report on the timeline defined by the board's monitoring calendar. If, as a result of the board item, board members walk away with data that shows current student progress towards the board's goals for student outcomes, the item is probably student outcomes focused, and you can answer yes. Otherwise, it's almost certainly that the answer is no. So for each of these items where you just put a minute count, you're going to go through and identify, was this item focused on your goals for student outcomes, yes or no? So put a Y or an N next to the items. Was, again, the only way to answer yes to this question is if the entire purpose of the agenda item is to monitor progress relative to the board's adopted goals using a monitoring report on the timeline defined by the board's monitoring calendar. If, as a result of the item, board members walk away with data that shows current student progress toward the board's goals for student outcomes, then the item, yes, is probably student outcomes focused. Put a Y or an N next to each item. Yes or no, these items, this agenda item is focused on student outcomes. As a result of this item, we actually receive data about how students are performing in reality relative to the goals that we've set. If that was not the case, then you would put an N next to the item. If that is the case, you would put a Y next to the item.
Student outcomes.
Give you about another minute.
No, that's the right door. Yeah, you just go to the right again. To go.
I'm going to check in with what you've written down so far in about 30 more seconds. Got less than a minute left. Put a Y or an N next to each item. All right. So just as a quick check-in, how many Ys did you have? We'll just go around the circle. We'll start with James, and we'll just go around the circle. How many Ys did you indicate? How many Ys did you indicate, James?
It being that we have such an austere definition, I had one Y.
Oh, which number item was that?
That was voting on the consent agenda.
So that was
My,
item number 9?
yes,
Okay.
my next closest Y was 8.
All right, so maybe 8, maybe 9. Got it. Carolyn, how many Ys did you have?
I had 6.
Okay, which ones?
I had convened the meeting.
Okay.
I had
So hold on, let's check it. So as a result of the convening, as a result of doing the call to order, the roll call, the establishment of quorum, and the pledge of allegiance, did the board receive data about the extent to which students are performing relative to the board's goals?
Well, if they didn't convene the meeting,
That's not the question. The question is, during item number 1, did the board receive data about student performance relative to their goals?
okay, no.
Got it. So let's take that why away. How many whys did you have?
Okay, under those premises, the only why that I can quite possibly back up might be the superintendent's report, depending on what it was.
All right, so on the June 15th, the superintendent report provide data to the board members regarding student performance.
It's possible, most likely.
All right, and which item is that?
Number 5.
5?
He wasn't present.
All right, got it. Stan, how many whys you got?
1,
Which one is that?
5.
All right, Tina, how many whys you got?
Good job, Stan. I have the same thing, but I have a maybe, which is the superintendent's report. If I'm not mistaken, I do think we received a report related to graduation, and data was given, so that was my other why.
Which one, which number was that?
That would be number 5, superintendent, CEO, executive report.
So that's your one why?
That's my one why.
Gotcha.
But, oh, sorry, board recognition, it was my other why. If we had, I feel like we had graduation diplomas or students that received diplomas.
Okay, Eric,
I had one, number 5.
Michael,
I would say 1, number 5.
Eva?
I had none,
Okay,
but maybe for the superintendent's report, but honestly, I don't think it was directly tied to any of the goals and guardrails as written.
okay. Ramona? How many whys did you
Same.
have?
Same as what she said.
Okay. Carol, how many whys did you have?
Same. Just the maybe for depending on.
The question mark for 5?
Yes.
All right, Talisa, what'd you have?
Based on associated with goals and guardrails, 0.
0, got it. All right. Before we go to the next step, what are you noticing?
There were very few to no whys.
Best case scenario,
Was 1.
there was not a lot of focus on the things that you identify as priorities. Best case scenario.
Right.
There, worst case scenario, I didn't focus on the things that you call priorities at all. But best case scenario, did, but very little. The worry that I have for you is that your staff is going to align not with what you say are the priorities, but with what you show are the priorities. That is my fear for your children right now. My fear for your children is that your staff won't align with what you say are the priorities. They will align with what you show are the priorities. Does this make sense to folks?
Yeah.
That is my fear for your children. You can calm that fear by actually yourself creating alignment between what you say and what you do. But as long as there is a gap between the saying and the doing, you are always undermining the potential for alignment within the school system around the things that you say are the community's vision and values. Your actions actively, pathologically undermine what you say are the community's vision and values when how you act is out of alignment with them.
Yep.
Part of our work over these 2 days is to begin to talk through what do we do to create alignment between the board saying, which is why we started with this document, because you declaring the community's vision and values really is the first step. But alignment between what you say and what you do. And everything else that we're going to do over these 2 days is just an extra layer on top of that theme of how do we bring alignment between the board saying and doing. Yeah.
I agree with what your fundamental argument. I totally agree with it. Where I'm going to push back is that every bit of what we have voted on at that meeting as board business, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, does align to what we prioritize. It's just a very condensed illustration of what that is. First and foremost, we sat through a board review. I called that young woman on the phone, and we went through 20 minutes, 25 minutes of walking through this agenda with my questions about what investments or where. For example, now I can't read.
I didn't bring my glasses. I was like, I didn't
You
bring my
know,
glasses either.
whether it's authority to enter an agreement to purchase HVAC control systems
Yeah.
upgrades to AGM
Yep.
Energy Services, right? This is a part of our equity initiative via our Project Fix It that is providing safe, warm, dry environment for our students. That is for all of them in the areas that we've targeted as need in that equity space. So it's very easy. I just want to be careful of how we word things because the general public, the community who watches us or who isn't, aren't really aware of the pre-work that is done in advance of a board meeting to ensure that our questions were answered. And when they aren't, I bring them to the table, she bring them to the table, he bring them to the table, and any one of us brings those queries and concerns to the table. And then we have extended dialogue, and at times, I'll state it lovingly, diatribe about what these matters entail.
Yeah.
So I want to be, I want to follow your process and think about how we reframe this whole piece to illustrate it and demonstrate it differently.
Yeah.
But please, I want to be careful about how we say we're undermining the community, because we really aren't.
Yeah, I didn't say you're
They
undermining.
just don't understand that.
I didn't say you undermine community. I said you were undermining the alignment of your staff.
Okay.
And that's a huge difference. I can't speak to your community. I don't have the context for that. Here's what's clear, is the things that you're describing are spot on. There is a huge gap between your intent and your impact. And much of our work is designed to bridge said gap. So if you all do all this work to try to be thoughtful about alignment of resources, but nobody knows that you did that,
Right.
then your intent is well intended, but that doesn't mean that it amounts to any impact. What I want is to bridge that gap, is to support you in bridging that gap. And so there are practices that we could bolster that can make apparent the areas where you are trying to cause alignment, but that are unapparent, and that you can begin to redesign the areas that are aggressively not aligned.
So without me getting too denotative too
Yeah.
about terms, because I'm gonna go back to my conversation with Sarah before this in preparation for today.
Yeah.
So the impact is that our buildings got HVAC, students who did not have heating and cooling, students who weren't in necessarily a warm, safe, dry environment. My sister here mentioned the old Brookhaven, the new, for folks who are listening, the new Global and Columbus North International School, where they have immersion languages and multi-ethnic racial students who are going there mastering all kinds of global lingua franca. It is no longer Brookhaven. We closed it. And that's not a diss. That's just straight facts. So I want to be, careful to call the school what it is.
What it is.
Because they're concerned about their identity. I digress.
Yeah.
Again, we've done considerable work in this space to already make sure they had a new gym, impact, to make sure that they had heating and cooling in that building, impact, to make sure before they started school last year that they had painted walls, impact. So the impact of our work are these things. Now, what staff or community may be missing on are the outcomes. The outcomes are not necessarily what we are, again, in terms of intent, are really clearly showing. I totally agree with what you're saying, I do. And I want to work towards that effect, that process, so that they're not only aware of the impact because they have to experience it. It's hard to really understand what our impact is beyond funding something when you haven't experienced it. Again, what Doc was talking about when she said, I walked in the building and saw this, that, and the third. That's experiential. Again, a major part of how we demonstrate impact. But I think what we really focused on in your conversation is outcome. Inputs, things that we invested, put forth, and then outcomes, things that were the anticipated result, so to speak, that are measurables that we could discuss. So again, just sticking to the denotative definition of your inputs, outputs, that whole logic model type thing, inputs, outputs,
and outputs.
impacts.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we don't confuse those terms too.
Yeah. Ramona?
So I agree with you, AJ. I've been saying this for a little while. I'm happy that we're here because we do need more data. We do need more information, and we need the data on the information of what we're saying. You know, Dr. Dixon can tell you, like, when are we going to go to, this is what is important, this is the information, board, these are the resources I need, or these are the deficits, these are the things that are going well, and then where are we at to ensure that we're reporting to the community. To be a board member here and be at the end and find out at the end if our kids are not succeeding instead of the third month or the fourth month when we could have possibly made interventions. So I am in total agreement that there needs to be a shift in what we're reporting, whether it's item 5, 6, whatever it is. You know, going back to scheduled meetings on, you know, this is when we get the report cards. We're going to discuss with the report cards, student outcomes, reading proficiencies. This is where we're at. These are the interventions. These are the things I need as a superintendent to ensure that we're meeting these goals and keep on going. So I understand where you're at, I guess is my point.
Other reflections? Yeah. Dr. Pierce?
I think Board Member Brown had his hand up before me.
Eric?
I understand and I agree that we need to make these kinds of changes structurally to the agenda, to how we operate. The place that I question is the assumption that I think you're making, that people pay attention to how we spend our time in the board meeting. Other than our administrative leadership, I don't know the extent to which anybody pays much attention. Yes, there's some people that watch online. Yes, that number increased over this past year.
No,
or-
we're on the same page.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
Look, when I watch you all's meetings, you all spend a lot of time, talking to the camera. I don't understand why, because out of the massive size of the community here, essentially nobody's watching. Like, even if you have 1,000 people watching, for the scope of who you serve, that if you think that's an adequate way of getting the message out, we have different ideas of what community engagement sounds like. So you all spend a lot of time talking into the camera, saying, hey, I want people out there to know. As a functional matter, that is not how the message is getting out. The concern that I'm lifting up for you is that one of the key things that boards thoroughly underestimate is the power that boards have in terms of the creation, the culture of the organization. And that culture is not merely transmitted by your staff watching you, though that certainly is the case. It's also very much transmitted by how you all conduct business, what type of things you prioritize or don't prioritize. If somebody only shows up at your board meeting once per year and they hear you say this, but they see you do this, and then they never come back, then they have a fixed understanding of the extent to which your actions match your words. So there is a cultural leadership element to the work that the board does that absolutely should not be underestimated. The other way that, and I think the more, direct and frequently dangerous way that is transmitted is if this is the agenda that you are telling your 3 direct reports reflects the vision and values of this community, then your 3 direct reports go forth and behave as if this is what it looks like to focus on the priorities. They have no other tangible way, because there's no other time when the board meets. They have plenty of other interactions with board members, but if this is their interaction with the board. And so if this is what your 3 direct reports experience, you say, okay, well, if we have a board meeting and there are questions as to whether we ever talked about results for students, and that is a normal and acceptable practice, you have clearly articulated a cultural norm to your 3 direct reports, And you would be wise to recognize that that does in fact have impact on how they choose to allocate their time throughout the week, which impacts how their direct reports allocate their time, and so on and so forth throughout the organization. That is the mechanism that we're fighting against here. Not that the community and 1,000 teachers are watching you. It's that how you all function gives clear signals, not only to your community and your staff, but more explicitly, to your direct reports.
AJ, I just want to do a little time check. It is 7:51.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for providing me an opportunity to respond to this. So I think we're bringing two elements that we should work on separately, but then couple and marry together. So one, I don't think this retreat is a referendum on our board. We haven't been evaluated. We haven't, we just haven't gone through that process, right? So some of the language was we as a board aren't aligning. Our work isn't aligning, right? So it became, if I might say, it sounded like it was a referendum on our board. And so, one, it's not that. Two, I think what it is we have an agenda. And the agenda can be very simple. The delivery of the information that aligns with that agenda needs to be tailored better, needs to be concise. So when board member Reyes says that we need data, we need timely and accurate data. And every statement made by a direct report needs to tie in not just numbers and figures, but in a meaningful way, timely and accurate data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative data. That's what we need to go along with that. And so for us to be held to a standard in which we have, this is our first year operating, I think, as a board, where that's taken as a given, it's an ouch moment. It's wait a second, we haven't even had the opportunity to sit down with our direct reports to look at this agenda and say, hey, every time you bring something on item 5, align it with either goal 1, 2, or 3, or align it with guardrails 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? To connect that. So I think those are tweaks that can be made, and so I appreciate this activity and conversation and dialogue that we're having tonight. But I want us to be mindful that it is really two separate processes. Our agenda's fine. It's a straightforward, simple agenda. The way we deliver it, the way we structure our meeting is what needs to be improved.
Other reflections on this?
So, kind of along the lines with what Dr. Pierce is saying, I mean, first of all, AJ made me do this process as your board president like months ago to get ready for this. And that's why we tried to tweak some things. If you guys remember, I was doing small tweaks because I didn't want to do this by myself. I need your help. So maybe I've just had more time in it. And so it isn't that we are doing anything wrong. In fact, everything that we vote on is essential.
Right.
It is aligned with things, like in the bigger sense, aligned with where we want to go and pushing equity, and certainly things in this agenda. We voted to join the group that's looking at the fair school funding. I mean, that's really important to our district. I think where AJ is having us go, though, is just an analysis of, like what Dr. Pierce is saying, be more thoughtful about how we are aligning this agenda to really spend our valuable time together doing these things that the community values. And I will tell you guys, it's not going to be the whole agenda. Our goal is to get half the agenda really targeted, because we still have to do the HVAC and we still have to do all the other things that we need to do as a board. Because here's the truth. Even though, we have these, the board is going to be super focused on these 3 goals, these 4 guardrails. We're going to talk all about them. Everybody's work is so critical in this district to get here. And so there's nothing wrong with our agenda. There's nothing wrong with the way we've been doing it. This is all brand new. It is an exercise, like Dr. Pierce said. But I just want to make sure that also, people that are involved in this and, don't feel like they are being undervalued, because that's not what this is either. This is really just a way of kind of thinking about how do we spend our most valuable time together, because our community has asked us to be here. They've told us what these values are, and then in turn, we know that's what our staff is spending their most valuable time on, to get ready for these board meetings.
And I think to add to that too, it also helps that now when we bring our reports, we're laser focused on whatever that item is. So if we're coming back in August, for example, we are talking about interim goal 1.1. That's it, right? That's a lot of data to digest and dig in. And I think that, to me, helps our team, so we're not trying to come back with 3 goals, rush through it. It's a long meeting, people are tired. And so focusing on one piece on a calendar really allows us to do that deep dive, and you ask those essential questions of us and getting that feedback, and people see you. People see you asking those tough questions that you asked during the meetings with Misty, right? You're asking those questions. People don't necessarily see it all, but you're all asking those questions. So it really helps us focus on, this is what we're gonna bring into the board. This is important. The board wants this information. You want to ask questions publicly about it. And you're monitoring. It shows that we're monitoring those. So I like those adjustments that we're making, because I think it's going to help our team bring back that data that you want.
So, hold on. We're essentially almost at time. So I want to respect that and close this out, but don't worry, we're going to jump right back in this in the morning. So, bring your hiking boots, because we going to march. So here's the thing. This is the context, for our work tomorrow. All we had time for today was to set the stage. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into what does it look like to actually monitor progress relative to the board's priorities. We're actually going to dive into that and do some practice around that, so you have some sense of what does it actually feel like. If we're going to spend half of our time each board meeting really doing a deep dive into what is true for our students, what is their lived experience, as the data reveals it for us. If we're going to spend half of our time there, we need to actually practice that and start leveling up our skill set in that area. So that's going to be a big chunk of our time tomorrow. But then we're also going to circle right back to this conversation, and we're going to finish this activity. So don't lose track of this, because we'll do the other part of this activity. But if you want some homework, the question that you have to ask yourself for every single item that is an N, so there was N's and Y's. For every single item that is an N, if you want to do some homework to speed up our time tomorrow, do the last piece of the activity, which is keep, delete, modify. For every single item that is an N, where you said, no, this is not focused on student outcomes, go through and answer the question, okay, so do I want to keep that item? Do I want to delete the item? Or do I want to modify the item? With the idea being, if you spent 2 hours in a board meeting, then how much of that time do we want to focus on student learning?
2 hours.
If we spend 2 hours in a board meeting and our goal is 50% focus on student outcomes, then then how much time do we want to spend on? At least an hour. So now you got to think, as you go through this thing, you're doing your keep, delete, modify, what are we going to have to change or delete in order to free up an hour in this in this agenda to make sure that it's focused on the things that we say matter most? And then the other hour is what do we need to modify about that to legitimately do the work that our legal and moral authority requires within the remaining hour. That is a huge part of the conversation tomorrow. Feel free to finish this activity. You've got the instructions for it. Keep, delete, modify. Feel free to finish that activity at home. Either way, we'll dig into it tomorrow. But if folks actually do some of that tonight, then it'll get us a step ahead. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you. We are now at 8 o'clock, and AJ has given us our homework. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Sorry, I threw Stan off. I was too quick.
He should have been ready.
Well, it didn't recognize
That's a
because I
demerit.
had my mask on. I believe Dr. Pierce made the motion,
Yes.
and did I hear Board Member Brown second? Correctly?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you all set?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland,
Yes.
Vice President Reyes,
Yes.
and President Adair.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Thank you. We are now adjourned.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Miss